Hey guys, happy
belated
Memorial Day, and you know what it being
June 1st, which is a few days after.
Memorial Day means? That's right. That means it's only a month till Gettysburg. And although I love being in Vermont, I am very glad that I moved back here. I gotta say, the one thing I did miss last year after I moved up was going to Gettysburg at the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. However, this year I am going down to Gettysburg for the 160th anniversary, and I am pumped. But you know what? I've got a big video coming then, slightly shorter one now, about Grant at Gettysburg. Now, look, my audience is smart people, mostly, and so I know what you're thinking. But Grant wasn't at Gettysburg. He was at Vicksburg. No, wrong. Grant was at Gettysburg. Lewis Addison Grant. Oh, you thought I meant Ulysses S. Grant, the one that everyone knows? Well, no, of course he wasn't at Gettysburg. He was at Vicksburg. You're right. But there was a Grant at Gettysburg, and that's a Grant I care about for this video, so that I can say Grant was at Gettysburg. Fun thing, Lewis Addison Grant, the one who was at Gettysburg, he was actually the father of Ulysses S. Grant. But it wasn't the Ulysses S. Grant that you're thinking of. It's Ulysses Sherman Grant. That's right. Lewis Addison Grant named his son after the two best Union commanders, which I think is great. But let's get into Lewis Addison Grant, who I'm going to try and start saying Lewis A. Grant or just Grants. Because by this point, you know, it's not Ulysses S. Grant, okay? Out of the way? Okay. So, he first joined the Army in the 1st Vermont Infantry Brigade as a major in the 5th Vermont Infantry Regiment on September 16th, 1861. 9 days later, on September 25th, he was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel of the 5th Regiment. Now, I mentioned the 5th Regiment was part of the 1st Vermont Infantry Brigade, and this brigade also included the 2nd Vermont, 3rd Vermont, 4th Vermont, and 6th Vermont. So, at this point, I want to state how hard it is to stay on track on my research, because when I started getting into the formation of this unit, William Baldy Smith comes up, and he's a very controversial figure. So I ended up going down a rabbit hole researching him, and I'm not using that for this video because I remembered that this video isn't about him. However, I may do a video on him in the future, as he is a native of St. Albans, Vermont. But this isn't about him. This is about Lewis A. Grant and the 1st Vermont Brigade, which I will continue referring to as the 1st Vermont. However, in April of 1862, it joins the Army of the Potomac as the 2nd Brigade of the 2nd Division of the 6th Corps. So I'm going to keep referring to it as the 1st Vermont, which is the 1st Vermont Brigade. Assume I mean brigade unless I say corps or regiment. So, the 1st Vermont takes part in the Peninsula Campaign and shines, in particular, in the 7 days in which Grant's regiment, the 5th, takes 209 casualties at Savage's Station on June 29th, 1862. The same year, on September 16th, 1 year after Grant first enlisted, he is promoted to full colonel. Then, on December 14th, my mom's birthday, shout out mom, love you, he received a leg wound at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg! 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 On February 21st, 1863, Grant is promoted to command of the entire 1st Vermont. Right? So he's no longer at regimental command, he's now at brigade command. He's still a colonel, however, he's a brigade colonel or brigadier colonel, terms vary, which is as close you can be to general without being it. So, he's not General Grant, number 2, yet, but he is high-ranking. So, during the Chancellorsville campaign, while engaged at Salem Heights on May 3rd, Grant displayed such gallantry that 30 years later he would be awarded a Medal of Honor for his acts that day. Reminder at this point that I have been blowing through the first 2 years of the war, and I have skipped some things because I want to get to Grant at Gettysburg, the title of the video. So, just reminder, I have skipped some things. There were other battles that the 1st Vermont engaged in that I did not mention. Know that this is an experienced unit, okay? It's not only the ones I said. So, proper context. Okay. Now, speaking of him at Gettysburg, we need to go with his journey to Gettysburg. Beginning June 26th, the 6th Corps begins heading north from Barlow Station. Now, remember, the 1st Vermont is in the 6th Corps. Now, they march at least 25 miles a day, most days more. And reminder, a marathon is 26.2 miles. So you have men from the north marching in late June, a marathon a day in the south. Not far south, but they are below the Mason-Dixon. Obviously, some men fell from exhaustion, heat stroke, and dehydration. The dehydration because the men weren't allowed to stop to get water. Because if you had men falling out of line to creeks or wells to get water, well, then you lose cohesion. And you know what happens when you lose cohesion and when there's stragglers? The Confederate cavalry, Mosby's cavalry that was in the area, would pick off any stragglers. So it was actually for the men's safety that they weren't getting water, because it was safer to risk heat stroke and dehydration than to allow the men to go out of line, because the pace had to be maintained. You couldn't have an entire unit stopping, or else you lost hours. If you stop an entire corps to fill canteens, you lose hours of marching time, and they had to be on the move. So the men filled their canteens in the morning, and that was what they had for the day. The final day of marching, June 1st and 2nd, here by day I mean 24-hour period. Obviously, that's 2 calendar days, but it's because they didn't start till later in the day. It was grueling. The men marched over 30 miles, with some elements of the 6th Corps marching up to 37 miles in 17 hours to arrive on the southern outskirts of Gettysburg after 3 p.m. The bright side of this was that the final march began at 9 p.m. the previous day, July 1st. So it at least began at night, which made it slightly cooler, although it takes a while to cool down. But, heat stroke isn't as bad, especially because the sun's not beating down on you, for the first half of the march at least. Now, I said they arrived on the southern outskirts at 3 p.m. They didn't fully arrive until closer to 4 or 5, because you have the forward units arriving, but that's not much force. Also, the fact that riders are sent forward ahead of the actual main column, so that Meade was able to place the men before they were actually fully there. So they arrive at 3, but they're there closer to 4 or 5. Now, upon arrival, the 6th is split up and used to plug gaps, with some men seeing action around 6, slightly before, but around 6, some men start seeing action. With the arrival on the actual field, I can now focus on the 1st Vermont again, as I no longer have to do the march of the 6th Corps, which, by the way, if you know the 6th Corps Gettysburg history, the thing they're known for is the fact that they marched marathon after marathon days to get there. The 1st Vermont saw barely any action on the second day of the battle, July 2nd, their first day of the battle. They saw barely any action. On July 3rd, the 1st Vermont was positioned along what is now Wright Avenue, named after General Wright, one of the division commanders of the 6th Corps. And during Pickett's charge, the high water mark of the Confederacy, the 6th Corps was too far away to do anything. Now, they were still serving a very important purpose. Not only in reserve, but also, if you know the general layout for the second and third days of the Battle of Gettysburg, on the second, the flanks were tried, and then on the third, the center was tried. However, the flanks came close to breaking. Sedgwick, the 6th Corps commander, was there to stop flanking because, they should have just gone farther right.
The they in this instance is the Confederates. I realize I didn't make that clear.
They should have outflanked him. The 6th Corps was there specifically in reserve to respond to any flanking movement. So, even them being low-level engaged and not taking any casualties, not engaging in that much of the fighting, they still were very important. I mentioned not much of the fighting, and you can partially tell that by the low casualties. The entire 6th Corps took 1.7% casualties. The heaviest of the losses they took was in artillery, because when they arrived to the field on the 2nd, their artillery was immediately stripped from them and sent to join a larger battery. So, the thing is, Grant actually shines here. His men took a whopping 0.05% casualties, which is insane, that you have 2 decimal points. So, I actually have a breakdown right here by regiment. The 2nd Vermont Infantry Regiment, 528 men on the field, no casualties. The 3rd Vermont Infantry Regiment, 428 men on the field, no casualties. The 4th Vermont Infantry Regiment, 437 men on the field, 1 casualty. The 5th Vermont Infantry Regiment, the regiment that Grant started with, 341 men on the field, no casualties. The 6th Vermont Infantry Regiment, 362 men on the field, no casualties. That's right. That 0.05 casualty rate was 1 guy. 1 casualty for the entire brigade, because they saw very light fighting. But, like I said earlier, having reserves gives you options, meaning they were still important to the success. Now, could I be taking this with a mild amount of copium? Yes, because in an earlier video, I mentioned, while at the monument to the 2nd Vermont Brigade, that I had an ancestor who fought in the 2nd Vermont, which is true and not. Upon more research, he fought in the 2nd Vermont Infantry Regiment, not the 2nd Vermont Brigade. Meaning, he saw little to no action at Gettysburg. Now, the 1st Vermont, like I said, did engage prior to Gettysburg and after. In fact, at the Battle of the Wilderness, that is where they shined. They are famous for their actions in the wilderness. And so, yes, although I did have my personal connection to Gettysburg slightly lessened by the ancestral research I did, still something was done, and I'm actually going to cover the other 2nd, this time being the 2nd Brigade instead of the 2nd Regiment, in another video, hopefully posted at one of the days of the battle. I haven't decided when yet. But, so, look forward to that in a month, and let me know what Gettysburg stuff you want to hear, or Vermont stuff. Like I said, I am going down to Gettysburg, so I don't know, maybe I'll see one of you. I won't recognize you, but if you see me, wave hi. Peace.